Good evening and welcome again to Ideas at Work and Beyond. You know, sometimes I have a bit of a problem with my identity. What am I doing? Is this a serious journalistic show? Is this some sort of right-wing hype up the Republican show? What the heck is going on here? And I say, I'm not really sure, but then I just remember, I do this for free. They can't really fire me. There's no one that's going to worry about the ratings, so all I can do is just come out here and tell you like I see it what's going on. And you know what? You can turn the channel. There's preseason football on right now. I can tell you that the Jets are losing to Philadelphia, which is not good if you like the Jets. I don't know what the Giants are doing. But you can watch this show tonight and you'll get some raw information about what's going on in the state of Connecticut. I moved to this state 25 years ago. I know if you're not a member of this state for 5 generations, you're just an interloper. But I have grown to love this state. I've raised my family here. The last one we just sent off to college last week. And I love the Nutmeg State. I love what it stands for. I think it's a great place to raise a family. And I am concerned about the state of Connecticut. Right now, as I look at the debt that we're in, we are the #1 indebted per capita state in the union. $4,859 per person in the state of Connecticut is in debt. We are hemorrhaging jobs. We are voted consistently the most business-unfriendly state in the union. Can you imagine? Here we are in the middle of a recession. We're desperate for jobs. Those of you out there right now, if you're anything like me, you've had friends and families that have had to leave the state. They've had to lose jobs. You've seen men of the family, heads of the households go through that aching 6 months. Turns into 9 months. Turns into a year. Turns into year 2. And you almost hate to ask them, so how's it looking? Any nibbles? And they say, yeah, I'm looking, I'm trying to find a job, and they can't find a job. And where do you think these jobs are going to come from in the state of Connecticut? They're not going to come from the government. The government is broke. Hartford is broke, and it's broken. Someone said that. I forget who it was. It might be my guest. Hartford is broke and it's broken, and there isn't any money left there. We just had Harrisburg, Pennsylvania today. I don't make this stuff up. I just drive around in my car and listen to the radio. Today, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania said it's reneging on its bond rating. It can't afford it. It can't afford to pay its debt. It can't afford to pay its credit card bill for their monthly payment. That's what we're looking at in this country, on a national level, and here in the Nutmeg State. We are in trouble, and it's not good. And it's not going to be any of this stimulus nonsense coming from Washington that's going to get us out of this. What's going to get us out of it is a clear-thinking businessman that understands how the private sector works, has a handle on what it means to meet a payroll that is going to begin to create jobs in the state of Connecticut. And that's what we need. Now, you can say, hey, I'm not being an objective journalist, or, hey, you're just a chill for the Republican Party. You can say whatever you want. I'm telling you like it is. If we're going to count on government to get us out of this mess, we're going to be in this mess for a long time, and it's not going to look pretty. But if we can turn to the private sector, and we can begin to attract jobs, and turn Connecticut from the most business-unfriendly state to the most friendly state, I think we got a chance of turning this thing around, and I think our brightest days are still ahead. That's my thought. That's my rant for the morning. Al Robinson is looking skyward. He'll be joining us shortly.
I'm just shocked how fast you were this week.
I was sure.
Yeah.
I was very quick, and the reason I'm quick, I could really go on longer.
We know.
The reason I'm quick is tonight we are delighted, absolutely thrilled to, well, first of all, have Al Robinson here.
Of course.
And David Straight, who just had a huge article in the Ridgefield Press about the little Bambis running around and costing us all sorts of money, which I'm sure we'll get to. But most importantly, we have the Republican candidate for governor, Tom Foley, who's here to join us and to just tell us more about yourself, and tell us how you're going to get us out of this mess. So, Tom, thanks a lot for joining us.
Great to be here. That's quite a setup, too.
Thank you.
I just happen to be a businessman and
No kidding.
around in companies
Who'd
and
have
things
thunk
like
it?
that. So.
No, what I'd like you to do, if possible, and by the way, they'll put the studio line number up here so you can call in 792-4101. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay.
Because I don't know if the greater Danbury area has an intimate knowledge of you except for your policies. Tell us why you're running for governor.
Well, it's a good question because I am a businessman. I've been in the business world for about 25 years, turning around businesses. I have a undergraduate degree in economics and a business school degree, and I worked at McKinsey, which is a consulting firm in New York City for a few years, diagnosing business problems, figuring out ways to make underperforming businesses perform better. So then I use those skills to go out and acquire my own businesses and do the same thing. I was very successful at it, fortunately. It was good timing, and there was plenty of funding available for those sorts of acquisitions. And there were a lot of companies around in the 80s and early 90s that really weren't very well managed. Most companies today are better managed than they were, largely because if they weren't well managed, people would come in and take them over and they'd improve the performance. So I had the advantage of riding that wave, and I felt very lucky, and I also felt an obligation to give back. And so I went into government service. I've been involved in Republican politics for a long time, raising money for candidates, helping to recruit candidates, but I decided I wanted to get into government service. So I was asked to go over to Iraq in 2003 after the invasion and use my business skills there to oversee.
So was 2003 sort of your first step into the public sector as being a public servant?
An actual public service, yeah.
Okay,
It wasn't my first involvement in politics, but it was my first actual engagement in public service. And I went over there for 7 months, and I basically had a responsibility for getting most of the 192 state-owned enterprises, which was most of the large companies in Iraq, back up and running after the war. That was a big deal.
Now, were you one of these guys running around in suits with desert
no
boots
suits
on?
over there. No, we were running around with bulletproof vests on, unfortunately, if we were outside of the green zone.
Wow.
And a suit would have been pretty warm.
That was the hottest period of the war, too.
Yeah,
Between 203 and 204.
When I first got there in August of 203, it wasn't too bad, but if you remember Ramadan of October of 2003, there was a rocket attack at the Rashida Hotel, which is actually inside the green zone where a lot of the people were staying. I wasn't. I was closer. I was in a trailer closer to the...
But you were there when that rocket attack?
Oh, yeah. And they were regularly shelling. Between then and March when I left, they were regularly shelling the green zone. They were lobbing mortars and rockets in it.
So unlike when Hillary was there, you were actually being shot at.
Yeah. Well, when we were in the palace, which was the administration building that we served in, they had very thick walls, and if a mortar landed outside and went off, you're pretty safe. But when we were in our trailers at night and they were coming in there, if a mortar landed near your trailer, you probably wouldn't make it. So it wasn't easy, and it certainly was a difficult tour of duty. But I came back, and I was motivated to serve again when I was asked to be the United States Ambassador to Ireland.
Okay.
Much better gig.
Yeah, went from the hot parched desert
if you're ever offered a choice between those two, take the Ireland one.
Okay.
And I really, really enjoyed that. I was 2.5 years, and I got back in January of 2009. And I was just concerned about the direction of the country. I was concerned about the Republican Party. And I started talking to some people, and I was persuaded to run for office.
Okay.
They said we need...
That was in 2009?
Yeah, winter of 2009. So in March, I kind of suited up and said, let's go, and I've been on the campaign trail since then.
Excellent. Well, we have our panel here. Al, you had some questions for the candidate. And, what's on your mind?
Yeah, right off the bat, in 2012, I think the state will be dealing with a $3.5 billion deficit that we'll have to deal with.
Yep.
Many people have argued that you can try to cut spending down as much as you want. You can cut down right to the bone. And at some point in time, you're going to have to talk about raising some type of taxes.
Right.
Whether it's, the Connecticut Mirror came out today with an article talking about the state of Connecticut has one of the lowest sales taxes in the state at 6%, compared to neighboring states, which are around 7%. In New York, I think at some places in New York, it's at 8%. When we get beyond all the cutting of government and stuff, don't you agree that at some point in time we have to talk about raising some type of tax? And if you do agree, what taxes do you see increasing?
I absolutely do not agree, and I made that clear on the campaign trail. I think the legislature is unfortunately starting to fish around for ways to raise revenues because career politicians, and particularly the tax borrow and spend culture that's been going on in Hartford for way too long, just cannot get their hands around cutting expenses, which is what has to happen. We simply cannot afford to keep doing what we're doing in Hartford. We are spending too much money on our government. So we need to reduce the cost. There are other ways of raising revenue that don't involve new taxes.
Okay.
We should recover more money from the federal government. People who've been paying attention know that we've lost some pretty generous grants, 2 in education and 1 in transportation, that were hundreds of millions of dollars. Those are revenue opportunities that we're missing. And included in that budget projection, the deficit projection, is an assumption about the economy and where we are with jobs. And I think a good governor can come in and help get the economy stimulated sooner, restore jobs, and the revenue side, without raising taxes, will actually produce more income. So I'm not sure that you have to reduce expenses $3.5 billion, but you certainly have to reduce them $2 billion, which is 10%.
Now, we have the deficit now, the projected deficit is at 3.5, but that's done with, you and Mr. Malloy have talked about bringing back gap principles, which would drastically change that number. So we're not talking about 3.5, it would be increase a lot higher. So specifically, what is one major type of spending in government that you would do that can be that would bring a significant impact upon that deficit, which would be a lot bigger, seeing that you want, if you were elected, you're going to bring in gap principles?
Yep. Well, let me first mention gap,
okay,
because there are 2 elements to gap. When you switch over to gap, there is a big liability that's created in that first year, because
right,
there's certain liabilities that aren't recognized in what we call modified cash accounting, right, that are in gap. I believe that the legislature could create an exception and let that one-time accounting liability not run through the current account. This is what businesses do. It just hits the equity account. It doesn't run through the income statement. And actually, after that, when you get on gap accounting, the difference from one year to the next isn't that big when you average it over a number of years. But what it does do is it keeps the legislature from being able to play games by using the timing of payments to falsely underestimate expenses and overestimate revenues. So it doesn't create a much, other than that first year adjustment.
That first one's pretty big.
After that, it keeps the rules of the game clean and is a better system. Getting on to how you reduce expenses, the one I like to talk about most is our health care costs. In Connecticut, we have one of the highest health care cost systems in the country. And if we can reduce our health care costs by 10 to 15%, which is what the estimates of what was in the front end of the Obamacare, which never passed, but it was the part that we were going to save the money it was going to pay for covering the additional people. They estimated electronic record keeping, wellness programs, alternative ways of compensating victims of medical malpractice and medical errors, etc. You could bring the cost down 10 or 15%. If you could do that, you'd reduce the budget by $1 billion. You'd reduce the expense side, our Medicaid costs, and the cost of delivering the health care benefits for our workers and retirees. So that's a freebie. And individuals such as ourselves and private employers who are providing insurance, everybody saves that money. So that's a really good one, and one we ought to attack sooner rather than later. Then there's a long list of things in the plan that is right here, including reducing waste and duplication in government. Some cases participation where we're providing a very expensive service that can be provided less expensively by outside contractors. Riverview Hospital, for example, and many other facilities that we're running, the state is running, those services can be provided at very significant savings by private providers.
I think you talked about privatizing the Southbury Training School as well.
Well, that certainly is a facility that's very expensive to run, and it wouldn't surprise me if a private contractor could do it for less than we're doing it with running it directly by the state.
But Al, I have to take issue with you just for a second on this. We have a low sales tax. Let me just give everyone at home a little bit of a history lesson on the Connecticut sales tax, because it used to be Connecticut was like Florida and Texas, where you didn't have an income tax. But lo and behold, someone named Lowell Weichert, another guy from Greenwich, we'll leave that alone. But Lowell Weichert comes in and says, hey, we have to have an income tax. But he says, hey, we'll get rid of the sales tax. Don't worry about it. You overburden taxpayers. They have to work till April 27th of every year to pay your federal, state, and local taxes.
Come on.
I just want to weave that in there. Highest in the nation, by the way. Don't worry about it, because we're getting away with, we're putting away with all those sales taxes. We're just going to have an income tax, and it'll be fine. And then all of a sudden the sales tax comes in on, and then you on a TV show say, oh, guess what? We got real low sales tax, when it was supposed to be done away with once they brought in the income tax.
Well, I guess you can talk.
I mean, is there ever enough tax for the Democrats?
Well, two things real quick. I think we're dealing with Mr. Foley here. If we want to have a conversation between you and I about certain subjects, trust me, I'd be more than happy to do that with you. And I think there's a Governor Rowland, I think there's a Governor Rell, who are both Republicans, who could have repealed the income tax if they wanted to. And the sales tax, again, which has not been touched since around the 1990s, I think 91, is at 6% compared to Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and I can't remember the other state, but they're relatively higher. I'm just talking about neighboring states, and it was reported on in the Mirror.
If you're saying we don't pay enough taxes because they pay more in Massachusetts or New York,
I mean, we have
and there's a full revolt going on in Massachusetts.
Again, I know you love doing this, and we have more than enough time to do it any other time, but we have an hour with this candidate right here, and I think we want to talk to him about this.
Let me mention two things. Number one is you can't say, well, our border states have higher tax rates, so let's move it up there and nothing will happen.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's the argument that was made.
We have revenue in the state is we have lower taxes than New York City and surrounding states, so a lot of people in financial services and other businesses come here, and if you take that margin away, you're going to see jobs leave here, and you're going to see employers leave here. So that would not be a good idea to bring everything up and just say, well, as long as everything's even, we don't have a problem.
I'm not necessarily saying increase the taxes, but I'm just saying that, you know, you have a 6% here in Connecticut. You have other percentages that are higher in other states, and there's other taxes that are done in other states that are not done in this state, but compared to like
overall, we have the highest state and local tax burden of any state in the country.
Really?
Our state taxes alone are $8,600 per household on average household income of $68,000. It's 12.5% of income. Most people don't understand that because a lot of these are stealth taxes. They don't actually see them. They're hidden in the cost of products they buy and the rent they pay or the mortgage payment or energy costs. So, but it's for the average household in Connecticut, they're paying $8,600 a year to the state government. They're paying more. They're paying additional to the federal government and to their local government. But that's a big amount.
We were talking about taxes real quick. I think one of the taxes I think both candidates, you and Mr. Malloy, agree upon, one of the taxes that hurts families the most is the property tax, the local property taxes. What would you do if elected governor to deal with the local property taxes that people have to pay on their homes and their cars, and they don't really see a lot of that money?
Well, again, going back to our Democratic legislature in Hartford, they put a lot of mandates on towns that raise their costs.
Right.
And that falls disproportionately on the property tax in those towns. So mandatory binding arbitration, in-school suspensions, and all kinds of things that the state, and I think inappropriately interferes with the towns conducting their business, raises their costs, and so that drives everybody's property taxes up.
And I guess cities complain there's not a lot of ways to generate revenue. I think here in Danbury there's an argument that was made that maybe we should take a portion of the hotels, a portion of that, give back towards the municipalities. I guess cities and municipalities are really hampered on ways to generate revenue.
Well, maybe we should attract manufacturing back to Connecticut.
We could do it. One of the 7 industry sectors that I've identified is highly complex manufacturing. Low-skilled manufacturing, we're not going to be able to cut it because our cost of living here is too high, and so you have to pay people a wage that isn't competitive. But you know, we make very good jet engines here. We assemble them for Pratt & Whitney. We make turbine blades and all kinds of other things. We assemble helicopters. We do manufacturing and assembly here that's very sophisticated. They're great jobs for that provide a very steady and generous middle-class income, and we need to make sure we preserve those.
Marty, can I jump in on something else?
Absolutely. Dave Straight, and you have the website Straight Talk, and you were just featured in newspapers across the state on your deer situation. But hold that thought 1 second. Caller, are you there? Caller? Okay, go ahead.
I also had a terrific lunch with Jim Hyman. Challenged him on the voting record, I hope fairly anyway. But let me take advantage of the time that you spent in Iraq for a second. Clearly you spent more time there than all of us put together. But, and I bring this up not because maybe you can affect it directly, maybe you can, but we have I know a lot of people in Connecticut right now that have kids over there in Afghanistan in particular. I have a nephew that's at West Point that is probably destined to go to Afghanistan, and I worry about that a great deal. In a 48-hour period this week, 21 American soldiers were killed. It was one of the highest death counts in a 48-hour period since the war began. It seems apparent that the situation there is becoming increasing. We're not winning, and it's getting much worse. We've tried the surge. We've tried every trick in the book. You know, they don't call that the graveyard of nations, of empires, for no reason at all. I mean, having spent time over there, what do you think we can do with the situation in Afghanistan to get our troops home?
Well, you know, it's always a difficult assessment to make, particularly when you have such an investment that's been made over there. People get tired of the expense. They get. I went to a service on Monday in Glastonbury for Stephen Deluzio, who was lost in Afghanistan last week. It really brings home the cost of these conflicts overseas, and yet when we entered into them, there were good reasons for doing it, and I think those reasons are still there. It's just that people get exhausted with the cost. I don't think anybody thought when we invaded Afghanistan that we'd still be here 9 years later or 8 years later, whatever it's been. So it's always a difficult decision, but if you leave too early and all the costs that you've incurred might not have resulted in any return on that investment. If you stick with it for another 6 months or a year, you might get it stabilized. And I think in Iraq, we've shown that with the surge and with sticking with the program, that the place is stabilized enough that rule of law and a Middle Eastern form of representative government should be sustainable there.
Okay. Interestingly enough, not to press the point too much, but I don't know if you read the news in the last couple of days that the major bank in Afghanistan is being cleaned out, and now the Karzai is saying he needs U.S. help to try and provide liquidity once again for the bank. So when there's a flight of capital, it kind of tells you that maybe there's not a lot of confidence that we have a chance of winning. So the question is, how do you know when you're wrong? I mean, is it something that we continue on endlessly?
Well, I'm not an expert. Okay. I was just brought over because of my business experience, my private sector experience, and I did know something about how private sector economies develop and the institutions you need. So I'm not an expert on combat and all those things. I do know that when we were in Iraq, everybody was looking around for George Washington, the George Washington of Iraq, and everybody kept saying, maybe there's no George Washington here. And I think maybe that's a similar problem we have in Afghanistan, that you need a certain type of leadership, strong leadership, and that will fight corruption, will protect and preserve the institutions that we're trying to develop there to promote human rights and fairness for all the citizens and a modern society. So if you can't find the people, and maybe that's what's going on with the money leaving the bank. It's reflecting lack of confidence in the leadership there. I'm not sure it's reflecting lack of confidence in the United States. It might be reflecting lack of confidence in the United States is going to stay long enough to finish the job.
Right, that's fair.
I want to bring it back to Connecticut, because we have our own bank problems here in Connecticut as well. What do you think? I watched some of the programs you've been on, and you talked about sometimes the business climate. It's almost something just attitudinal, I think you said. It isn't necessarily the structure in Connecticut that makes it an anti-business state. But what will you do to reach out to businesses, to have them expand, to have them, expand their operations, to have them come to Connecticut? What was your plan for that?
Well, first you have to make them feel welcome here and appreciate it. And you have to reduce as much as you can government-driven costs, and such as, again, we talked about mandates on towns. Our legislature also puts a lot of mandates on businesses, which raises their costs and makes it more troublesome and inconvenient to employ people here. We have a very unresponsive state government. Bureaucracy, you hear about red tape and other problems that employers have. I've heard that the Department of Environmental Protection, for example, in some cases it can take up to 20 months to get a permit. And that's when an employer wants to expand the plant so they can hire more people. And in some cases, if you have a well-run state, we have a regulatory environment here that's pretty uncertain. And if you have a well-run state, a business is going to know whether or not they can get the approvals they need, for example, to build a plant, and they're going to know how long it's going to take. And they're going to make an assessment. Am I going to do this? Does it make sense to do this or not? In Connecticut, people don't know whether or not they're going to get the approval because the regulations aren't clear enough.
Right.
And we tend to avoid regulations, and we do things by guidelines. It's part of the way our statutes develop. But it increases uncertainty, and then nobody knows how long it's going to take. And so a lot of employers, I'll go to some other state where it's more predictable. So there are a lot of things that we can do. A governor is in charge of the executive branch. So the responsiveness of agencies like DEP, a governor can do that unilaterally.
Do you think our current, or I guess former, because he's running for Senate Attorney General, Blumenthal, has provided an environment that's hostile to business?
Absolutely.
I mean,
you can't be suing your employer. I mean, of course, if they're breaking the law.
Yeah.
But I don't think that most of the lawsuits that our own AG prompted against our employers in the state they weren't breaking the law. It was civil litigation. So
yeah,
I
it
don't
was
know.
like with Pratt and Whitney just recently that there was an editorial about. Other times, like I happen to know a guy who has a oil company, and when oil prices shot up. There was some sort of kickback or giving back or something like that, but it was all sort of ginned up. The guy did nothing wrong. It was just a marketplace where oil prices happened to spike, and people were upset about it. But Blumenthal came up with some sort of case and shut down this business. Made for a good headline for him, but it left this business owner pretty shattered, because you can't fight the government like that.
Yeah,
and if they see that it's an anti-government or an anti-business environment, there are 49 other states that would love to have.
And responsible leaders don't find false scapegoats. They use their leadership role to explain and help voters and citizens understand what happened to them when bad things happen that are unavoidable. They don't try and blame it on somebody who had nothing to do with it. Yeah. But some people can't resist the opportunity.
Your opponent in this race. I don't know. I was taken aback because he was on a picket line with some of the state unions, which I guess is fine. Everyone has a right to organize and so forth. But when you have the chief executive or a person who's running for the chief executive officer of the state, who's going to have to sit across a negotiating table with someone that just a week before he was on a picket line with, it doesn't seem like the voters of the state of Connecticut are going to get the best benefit from that type of negotiation. Yeah. That's a problem.
Well, I think Dale Malloy needed the unions to win the primary, and so he made a calculation there. But I think, unfortunately, that it does discredit or compromise his ability to present himself as someone who's going to lead the state and make the tough decisions. These actually weren't state workers. They were unionized workers at nursing homes, which are private nursing homes. But the nursing homes are all providing care for people who are being paid for under Medicaid in most instances. So it's costing the state. So if the wages go up, it's costing the state more. No, that's fine. But leave it to the bargaining unit. But I don't think the governor should be in there marching on a picket line on behalf of people who are striking to get higher wages when it's going to cost the government more money.
Al,
yeah, I'm happy you brought that point up because I was going to debunk Marty on something that he said there. But back to these state employees and the unions and all that stuff. State employees would argue that one of the reasons why they took these jobs in the first place is that for the long term, 10 to 20 years, because of the benefits that they received at a lower wage, they got better benefits as opposed to going to the private sector. And they did a fair agreement with the union, with the companies, with the state to stay on these jobs for this long term of time because of the benefits. What would you do if elected governor to negotiate with the unions to give back some, and how would you go about doing that?
Well, I agree with you. A lot of people go into government jobs are trading, or historically they traded income for security. Less risk of losing their job and good benefits. Fine, nothing wrong with that. But what's happened in the last 2.5 decades in Connecticut is that the current pay has come up. They're no longer making a compromise on the current pay. They're getting the security, they're getting the benefits, and they're getting more pay than the equivalent jobs in the private sector. So it's not a fair deal anymore for taxpayers. It's a great deal for state workers, and that's fine. State workers are hardworking people. They're trying to provide for their families just like everybody else. Got no problem with state workers, but we just can't afford to keep doing what we're doing because the cost is too high. So what do? We need to work with the representatives of the state workers, the various unions that represent them, to figure out a way to return it to something that's affordable. Okay, so that can either come by reducing the number of employees in the workforce, and I think that can be done with attrition if the unions are cooperative, because we rotate 1,500 to 2,000 people out of the state workforce every year. Retirements, people move out of state. Some people die. So over a reasonable period of time, we could get the state workforce down to a manageable level. But if the union wants to preserve all the jobs that are there, then there's going to have to be some kind of a compromise in the cost of the benefits or the cost of the current pay. So
are we talking about, let's go to the extreme measure, are you talking about maybe shutting down parts of government? Are you talking about layoffs to get to a negotiating settlement? Would you use those type of
Well, I would hope not to use layoffs, but I don't think a governor should ever give up the ability to lay off the state workers, because if the unions don't cooperate, that's the only way the governor can actually get the cost down, and the governor has a responsibility for running the government in a way that's doesn't run it off a cliff financially. So that should never be given up. It should be used as a tool in the negotiation. But hopefully, if a governor does a good job and shows strong leadership, I think compromises will be made to avoid layoffs, and it'll be the downsizing will be done through attrition, or there won't be any downsizing, and everybody will take some kind of a compromise in what they're paid and return the pay levels to more like what they were when the bargain existed that you were just talking about, which was people traded lower pay for more security.
Former governor, or the existing governor, Rel, talked about the bloat of bureaucracy is no longer affordable. She talked about eliminating 10 different agencies, about eliminating 70 of the 30 boards and commissions, cutting 20% of the cars, removal from the books of 130 unnecessary laws. These were some specifics that she laid out in her budget plan. Any of those appealing to you, and do you think that there's some like a good plan you can follow there?
Well, I'm not familiar with all the ones that she proposed, but I'm sure they're good ones. But there are certain parts of the budget that are very large, and if you don't address them, you're really not going to make enough of a dent in the spending to solve the budget deficit. Our Medicaid expense is about $4 billion of the budget. Okay, and again, that's $4 billion out of approximately $6 billion is related to healthcare costs. So we can get the cost of delivering healthcare services down. Right. We can save a lot of money. one of the ways you can do that in the Medicaid population for elderly patients is to transition more to community-based care, which is actually preferred. It's more humane, families prefer it, and the patients prefer it. States like Oregon have moved to about 75% of their Medicaid patients in community-based care. That's group homes and home care. We're still under 50%. If we could move another 25% there, we'd save something like $600 million. I'll bet that all of these, you add them up, they don't come up anywhere near $600 million.
Yeah, but I mean, it concerns me, though, just as I'm, thinking about the bloated state government, which she refers to here, that, I mean, if we can eliminate 10 agencies, if we can eliminate 70 boards and commissions, if we can combine courtrooms, if we can cut taxes, or we can cut cars 20%, there seems like there should be some savings, and it's just sending the right message that government isn't this ever-expanding
I agree.
agency.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, we have a call. I'm going to try and, can you put him on hold? Or just, all right. Caller, are you there? All right, if you're calling in, try 438-2003. Dial 438-2003 and we'll put you right on the air. Sorry we're having trouble with these phones. Okay, Dave, you have a question.
Can we switch gears to illegal immigration for a second?
Sure.
I mean, certainly in Connecticut we have a fair number of illegals, maybe not as pressing as a border state. But this past week, well, actually yesterday, the Justice Department filed suit against Sheriff Joe in Arizona for enforcing the state law. The Obama administration also referred Arizona to the UN for discrimination because of their law. Do you have an opinion on, do you support the law in Arizona? Is that something that we should have in Connecticut, where if someone is stopped in the act of a crime, that the arresting officer has a right and obligation to say, look, we need to see if you're a citizen or not?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this country was built on immigration, legal and illegal. I'm a great supporter, and I think this is a stronger country if we have a legal immigration policy that's bringing people to this country who want to work hard and contribute. So that's a good thing. Illegal immigration or undocumented immigration results, I think, because our policy really has never been good or clear or well thought through. And for the last 2 decades, it really hasn't been enforced federally. And I believe that Arizona wouldn't have the problem it has if the federal government did what it's supposed to do, which is enforce the immigration laws.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And in the New York Times the other day, they talked about a train that runs somewhere between the Midwest and here, where they actually, border guards do get on and check people's identification. So that sounded a little extreme to me, but I do think there needs to be a mechanism where people who are here illegally there's some intersection where authorities can determine that that's the case and they can be deported.
We have a caller. Caller, you're on the air. You have a question?
Yeah, we're here.
Go right ahead.
I got a question for you, Tom. I understand that you are a very successful businessman, so this question would be appropriate for you. We know that we're in a lot of trouble with health care with Obamacare, okay? And I understand the way you talk about Medicaid and insurance and the cost of insurances and things. Now, when this Obamacare goes through, how is this going to affect the states? What's the ramification, in regards to what you're trying to do and maintain the cost of health care and all? And also, the governor of Minnesota yesterday, I heard on the news, said that he wasn't accepting any federal funding because he wants nothing to do with this new Obamacare. If you can explain that, please, I'll let you go, and thank you very much.
All right. Well,
excellent. Thanks for the question.
Thanks for the question. First of all, there's good news and bad news with Obamacare in Connecticut. We have one of the most generous Medicaid benefit programs in the country, so the expansion of Medicaid benefits under Obamacare actually will save Connecticut money, because we're currently covering some Medicaid patients we don't get any federal reimbursement for, and we will under Obamacare. The bad news for Connecticut taxpayers is that the cost of Obamacare, which is going to come through your federal taxes that you pay, we already cover 96% people in Connecticut. So what Obamacare is expanding coverage to people who aren't covered, but we're already covering everybody in Connecticut that's going to be covered under Obamacare. So Connecticut citizens don't benefit from the additional coverage, and yet we're going to pay a huge bill. So Connecticut taxpayers are going to be paying the bill to cover people who don't have health care insurance in other states and not here in Connecticut. So it's not a good deal for Connecticut.
So if the Republicans take over the Congress and Obamacare is repealed, would you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I actually think that would be a good thing. I think Obamacare was, first of all, rammed through the Congress without popular support. I think it was rammed through without enough homework being done on what the impact was going to be. And I think that the liberal Democrats in the Congress who were promoting this from Nancy Pelosi on down really have a long-term goal of having a national health care system, a single provider system, and they designed Obamacare to make sure that eventually private insurers and private health care providers are driven out of the marketplace, and the government will step in and provide it, and we'll have a national health service. And I don't think that's a good thing. I live in Ireland. I know what national health service is like, and we don't want one here in the United States.
We've chronicled that a little bit on this show because my wife's from Canada, so I've seen a little bit of what goes on there. Al, set us straight on all this stuff.
Oh, I'll try to, but I'll take a few shows. One of the biggest things when you talk about municipalities, I think if you can look through all 169 municipalities in the state of Connecticut, if you look at their budgets, majority of their budgets go towards education, school budgets. We have the worst achievement gap in the country here in Connecticut. What are your proposals in terms of addressing the achievement gap and addressing the problems with education in the state of Connecticut, and how can you go about doing that without adding more burden to the budget?
Yep. Great question. One of the great assets that Connecticut has is we have a lot of very good schools in the state, but unfortunately in our inner cities we don't have very good schools, and that's why we have this achievement gap, and I think it's shameful. We have the money and the resources, we can do better, and we should be doing better. We're spending enough money. It's not a money problem. We're spending just as much money on our public school kids in New Haven as they are in New York City and other places, Massachusetts, for example, where the young people do much better. We were fifth in the country on NEAP scores about, I'd say, around the year 2000, maybe late 90s, and Massachusetts was 17th. Massachusetts, under Governor Weld and subsequently under Governor Romney, had decided that they were going to do a better job with their schools. They now have the highest scoring schools in the nation in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is just north of us. We have a lot of things in common and very similar demographics and everything. So we can do that, and we should do that. We should have the highest scoring young people, and we should make sure that our achievement gap closes so that our young people in our inner cities are being properly prepared for the workforce to be able to support families and hold jobs. So we can do a lot better. I'm going to be the jobs governor and the education governor.
What would you do specifically? Would you, let's say, for instance, would you approve of vouchers?
I approve of choice. I'm a big supporter of choice. So charter schools, magnet schools, as Chancellor Adamowski's done here in Hartford, allowing parents who are in a school that's underperforming to choose a different regular public school.
Does that mean, let's say, for instance, an urban school going to a suburban school?
They've done that in Hartford. There are some inner city Hartford kids who are bused out to West Hartford, for example. I think that's met with mixed success. So you want solutions that work, but there's enough density in our cities that there certainly are alternatives, choices for school. Then you have to have the money follow the child. We have a crazy system where if a child goes from a regular public school to a magnet school or to a charter school, the regular public school keeps the allocated funds, and then there's an additional allocation to the charter school, for example. that rewards failure, because that young person is leaving that public school for a reason. They're not doing a good enough job. And you don't want to keep funding failure. So you need to make sure that the funding is going to schools that are succeeding and is pulled away from schools that are failing. And then you need a mechanism so that the schools that are failing can be reconstituted. And reconstituted means you don't just hire a couple extra teachers, paint the classrooms. You basically shut the place down and build it back up with a clean slate. The other thing we need to do, we have a lot of excellent teachers in Connecticut. We need to get more of them teaching in the inner cities. And we need to make sure that teachers who aren't excellent and aren't performing are offered retraining and opportunity to become excellent. But if they can't do it, we need to find ways to get them out of the system. We simply can't be keeping underperforming teachers in the system at the expense of our young people learning what they need to learn.
And you talked about making sure that the money follows the kid. What would you say to the parent who sends their child to a private school but still is paying the taxes in terms of local property taxes for that empty seat in that school and on a public school level?
Yeah. Well, I don't think money should follow the child to. We have a public school system. We have a private school system. And I don't think the federal government should be subsidizing our private school system. So I don't think it should
get some type of rebate back for sending their kid to a private school, or should they be paying the same taxes? I mean, because in essence, you have a kid who is going to a private school, yet the parents are still paying the same amount of taxes as if that kid's going to a public school.
Let's do it one step at a time.
Okay.
Let's just get money following the kid to magnet schools and charter schools and other regular public schools.
So you're in favor of that? A voucher?
I'm asking him.
I'm asking you.
Well, I don't have any opinion. I'm not running for office.
I've got an opinion. I'm in favor of them.
You're in favor of vouchers. Yeah, I'm not surprised. But, you know, vouchers gets into all kinds of complicated areas. You're subsidizing religious organizations in some cases. I mean, it's just let's do the easy step, and then we can look later at whether or not that makes sense.
One more quick thing. Staying on education real quick, I'll be real brief. Higher education. Like I attend Western Connecticut State University. I think it's a fine school system, and I think John Rowland did a very good job in terms of addressing the problems with Central Connecticut State, WestCon, Southern, and improving those schools. But we have seen a decrease in classes, we've seen decreases in professors there, and the tuition is still going on to increase year after year after year. And we're not talking about kids who are going like to UConn or going to Yale. We're talking about kids from working families who are going to these schools because it's a state university and, you know, it's cheaper rates. What are you going to do to address some of the problems with the CSU system where the tuition is going up higher and higher, but classes are going, class sizes are increasing because there's less classes, and it's harder for kids nowadays to go to college?
Yep, I agree, and I think we need to keep the cost as low as we can. And one of the problems we have in the state is the governor, although we're paying half of the cost of UConn and other educational institutions, the governor has very little control over those costs. I was outraged when I learned that one of the coaches at UConn is earning, I don't know, $350-some thousand. I was looking for a $50,000 bonus.
But they are playing against Michigan, and should they win that game?
Yeah, that's helping me out.
I'm just saying.
I get my degree.
Okay.
Listen, that sounds like it's too much for a public institution, and so I would first and foremost be in favor of freezing salaries and wages at the very senior levels in our university system. Do a comprehensive review of compensation and other costs, and work with the legislature to figure out how the governor can have more control over the costs of these institutions. Because I think they've like you were complaining about the overall government, these have grown like an amoeba and are doing
Please
incurring a
call
lot
the
of costs.
bloat of bureaucracy is no longer affordable.
Yeah,
That's
there you
what,
go.
Okay, real quick, couple quick questions. Let's just talk brass tacks, raw politics. Everything okay with the rest of the Republican Party? We just had a grueling primary season. We had the kumbaya moment where we're all on the same team and we're looking to have a Republican in the governor's mansion.
Yeah, you know, parties come together afterwards. You know, a primary actually can be a helpful thing to a party. One of the great blessings the Republican Party's had in this cycle is we've had a lot of good candidates,
Yeah.
and still do. So a lot of people showed up at the starting line, and so the primary gives the party an opportunity to pick their preferred candidate. But in that process, everybody hones their game, they hone their message, they build their teams, they get better. So when they get into the general election cycle, you're better prepared for the big game.
So what do you think is going to push you over the top? I mean, the voter registration is obviously dominated by the Democrats, but what do you think is posed from between you and your opponent is going to really make the difference come November? Do you think there's just sort of a pro-Republican sentiment out there? Is there anger? Is the other guy known as a career politician? What do you think is going to be the winning formula?
Well, I think they're party-related things, and then we're two distinct individuals, and I think the party
could be more different.
Yep,
as far as
and that's going to be a very clear choice for voters in November. I think the unaffiliated voters actually decide elections in Connecticut because they're more registered unaffiliated voters than either Republicans or Democrats. So if you're a Republican, you have to get about 55 to 60% of unaffiliated voters, and I think unaffiliated voters, if you look at what happened with Scott Brown in December of last year up in Massachusetts, they went overwhelmingly, about 70% for him, and I think that was a somewhat of a unique race, but I think that
he took Barney Frank's district. Can you believe that? He actually did.
But people are angry. I mean, people don't like where we are. When you poll and you look at whether you ask people whether they think we're headed in the right direction or the wrong direction, low 20% think we're headed in the right direction. The rest of the people think we're headed in the wrong direction. That's both federally and in Connecticut. And people are angry. Their families are suffering. People have lost jobs or their incomes have dropped, and they have this inexorable rise in the cost of living. So everybody's getting financially squeezed, and yet they see the government continuing to borrow money, spend wildly, and so people want it reined in. They want spending reduced. They want somebody who can come in and create jobs and make sure that the economy gets going, relieves the financial stress on households. And that's pretty much what it's all about. And when you look at Dan Malloy, first of all, he had this...
Is that his name? Is that the other candidate? What's it? Malloy? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Jesus.
He was mayor in Stamford for 14 years.
Yeah, I heard about him being mayor in Stamford. I heard about work was done on his house. It sounds like a John Rowland situation.
Yeah.
We'd love to have him come in here, but you're unable to get Democrats to come in here. We can get Republicans right here.
Say that.
Well, then bring it. Come on.
We'll bring it. All right.
Sorry,
But he used little sparring going on here. He did all the same things in Stamford that they did in Hartford that got the state in trouble. It got Stamford in trouble. Stanford's lost 13,000 jobs since 2000. Their property taxes have gone up 80% while he was mayor. Their borrowing went up over 250% to over $340 million. Their credit rating was downgraded within a few weeks of his leaving office. So Stamford is suffering from the same sort of problems that the state is, and Dan doesn't have a plan for the state. He's not telling people how he's going to solve the budget deficit, so you have to assume his plan is to raise taxes. So with me, you're going to get more jobs and affordable government, and I think with Dan Malloy, you're going to get more government and more taxes.
Lightning round, real quick. Governor Chris Christie in New Jersey.
Yep.
Do you admire what he's doing? Could we see you, except maybe scaled down? You don't seem as heavy as him. Would we get a scaled down Governor Christie?
We have a very different way of communicating, but ultimately he's negotiating very hard and making the tough choices that need to be made in New Jersey to get through a tough time and make sure there's a future. And so that's the same challenge we face here in Connecticut.
Okay, a call wrote in, if you were elected governor, what would you do different from Rel, and how would you stay on the same, or would you stay on the same path as Rel?
Well, listen, we're in a different time. We face different challenges. Governor Rel did a great job, I think, while she was governor, but for most of the time she was governor, times were good. And now times are tough, and it takes a different skill set, I think, a different type of experience, and a different moxie, and I think I've got what it takes.
Dave, lightning round, you had a question?
Yeah, it might be a long-winded one, but I'll try
That's
to
all
make
right.
it brief.
This is a deer one?
Yeah. So this past week, the Fairfield County Municipal Deer and Management Alliance, which represents 18 of the 23 towns in Fairfield County, produced a report, an independent study that said that high deer densities are costing Fairfield County $180 million a year. That's more money than the U.S. is sending to Pakistan to assist with flood victims. What can we do in Fairfield County to address the problems that we have with high deer densities?
Well, to the extent
Make it
that,
quick.
yeah,
I say
the
blow
deer,
the little
yeah.
boys away every chance you can.
Well,
but I'm not running for
Hey,
governor.
I'm an animal lover, so I'm not sure I subscribe to blowing them away, but some kind of population control of the deer population. All the natural predators for deer that used to be here, wolves and others, aren't present. So we need to do something to control the deer population. How that's handled, I don't really know, but I agree with you. There is some menace on the roads. That we've got Lyme disease, and other, these are real public safety issues. So we need to do something.
Good.
Go ahead, lightning round.
Real quick, real fast. Governor Rell and, should I say, in the background, Lisa Moody have come forward with some judicial nominees. Some of the nominees were on the Friends of Lisa's list. There's been some criticism about that, and I want to find out your feelings about the nominees. If you're elected governor, would you take a review at those nominees?
I would not review her nominees. I think when you are an executive and you come in to office after someone, you need to respect the choices and appointments they've made. So I would respect the appointments that Governor Rell has made. But I do understand that the judiciary has said they don't need additional judges. So I, after taking office, I wouldn't appoint any new judges until the judiciary told me they needed additional judges.
Our guest this evening has been
Thanks.
Tom Foley. Thank you
enjoyed
so
it.
much for
It's fun.
coming
Good
in.
group.
Really appreciate it. If you'd like to hear more about Tom, just Google him. You can get on his website. You can find out information and become informed. And we would love to have Mr. Malloy come in if that can be arranged. So thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming in. Next week we have John Hartwell, who's running for state senate, and then after that we have a real Donnybrook because we have Dan Carter and Jason Bartlett who will have a live on-air debate. So join us again. Ideas of Work and Beyond, 9 to 10 p.m. on Thursday. What the heck else are you going to do? Tune in. Thanks.